The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. The IC continues to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program.
All right. Hello and welcome back to Colonial Outcast, the anti-imperialist podcast that every Beltway warhawk in Washington, D.C. would hate if they weren't too busy watching Fox News and CNN, which are busy, ginning up public consent for a direct intervention against Iran. The clip you just heard was Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard testifying in the Senate this past March during the Global Threat Assessment Committee hearing. According to the U.S. IC intelligence community, Iran doesn't intend to develop a nuclear weapon and hasn't since Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei issued a fatwa against nuclear weapons in 2003. Moreover, Iran, just like any other nation, has a right to pursue nuclear energy for civil purposes and is absolutely de-incentivized to give up their program in its entirety after what the U.S. did to Libya and Gaddafi after he gave up his nuclear program under U.S. pressure. And as we enter the fifth day of the distant conflict between Iran and Israel and the United States, today being Tuesday, the U.S. President Donald Trump warned residents of Tehran to evacuate on social media last night because that's the world we live in now, and suggested that the United States was working on something, quote, better than a ceasefire, whatever that means. And of course, Trump left the G7, the Group of Seven summit in Canada, a day early to deal with the conflict between Israel and Iran, telling reporters on Air Force One during the flight back to Washington, quote, "I am not looking for a ceasefire. We're looking at a better than a ceasefire," unquote. Trump's cryptic messages added to the uncertainty roiling the region as residents of Tehran fled their homes in droves, and the UN nuclear watchdog for the first time said Israeli strikes on Iran's main enrichment facility at Natanz had also damaged its underground section and not just the surface area. And Israel says its sweeping assault on Iran's top military leaders, nuclear scientists, uranium enrichment sites, and ballistic missile program is necessary to prevent its adversary from getting any closer to building an atomic weapon. A lot of gaslighting going around, right, guys? So the strikes have killed at least 224 people in Iran. That's reporting from yesterday. And Israel says it's also killed Ali Shadmani, Iran's new wartime chief of staff and the country's most senior military commander. His predecessor was killed in Israel's initial attack on Friday. So also, we've got, the Pentagon is expediting the deployment of the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier and other ships to the Middle East. And of course, Western media is playing up the efficacy of Israel strikes against Iran while downplaying Iranian strikes against Israel. But central to this conversation, which few are talking about, is what exactly does the U.S. hope to accomplish? Was Trump in lockstep with Netanyahu the entire time before the preemptive strikes against Iran? Did Bibi betray Trump by deliberately sabotaging the deal? Ask a dozen Washington insiders and you'll get a dozen different reads. So what we want to do with this episode, since the battlefield and political dynamics are changing moment by moment, is look at the overarching Western propaganda about this moment in history and the conversations going on around it. Talk about what is actually going on in Iran, balance it with objective military reality, and challenge the self-destructive ideological war machine that dominates the politics of empire. I'm your host, Greg Stoker, former U.S. Army Ranger turned anti-war activist and journalist, and I'm joined by regular contributor Travis, former field-grade artillery officer in Iraq, and Ahmad from the awesome media platform Propaganda and Company. He's a filmmaker, activist, and founder of Prop & Co., media brand cutting through the media lies. Thanks so much for coming, y'all, and bearing with the long monologue.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, Sam. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's a bro show. It's all dudes today, which is increasingly rare here on Colonial Outcast. So enjoy it, fellas. Yeah, cool guys. How's everyone doing? We're 5 days into this insanity, and how we feeling?
I'm enjoying the irony of the U.S. sending an aircraft carrier named after Admiral Nimitz, who was the signer on that memo telling the U.S. not to recognize Israel in the first place because it was a stupid idea, to the Middle East to handle the repercussions of recognizing Israel.
Wow, nice catch.
That's great. Yeah,
that's a nice piece of information.
Yeah, and we can actually pull up the memo that Travis actually hired some guild researcher to get to pull from the National Archives about of the Joint Chiefs after World War II, advising.
He was a crazy he was a crazy MAGA researcher. I conveniently left out why we were looking for what we were looking for. So,
yeah. But anyways, that is the hell of an irony. So, I mean, there's too many ironies going on right now. But before we get into all that, apologies, but my show notes demand our late stage finance capitalism plug. Are you aware that Colonial Outcast is on Patreon and that we have exclusive content, special episodes, and occasional live Q&As? Did you also know that you can subscribe to our Patreon and watch all our regular episodes for free without a paywall? If we ever get deplatformed here, you can find us over there. Also, I'm going to ask a favor of you iPhone users. If you can take a moment during this episode to go to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review with a couple of words, that would be awesome. We're at like 750 reviews, and I've been advised that once we hit 1,000, we hit a different algorithm. Anyways, look, we're just glad you're here with us to witness and comment upon our dying empire and the absurdity of the modern condition. Okay, plug over. Let's get stuck in. So I guess we're going to start by asking y'all, do you know who Mike Huckabee is?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, the U.S. ambassador to Israel now. Donald Trump appointed him. And just for some context, let's just look at who this guy is, because he's becoming an influential sycophant in the unfolding drama today.
I thought he was a guest star on the
What is that?
Wait, what's up?
I said I thought he was a guest star on the Righteous Gemstones.
I mean, he may as well be.
I think the question is, what does that Palestinian state look like?
Okay.
Where is it? Where is it going to be?
Well, what
does
are
it
the
have to be in Judea and Samaria? Does it need to be somewhere different? Does it need to be an opportunity for people to have a true place that is completely their own?
But
or is it
where could
going to
it
be
be?
in the existing areas that are currently under the dominion of the PA? So there's a lot of questions. That's why I'm saying I don't believe anybody can say it's impossible, it'll never happen. But if someone wants to declare that this is the exact strip of geography that is going to be the future Palestinian state, that's where the complication comes from.
Okay, well, that's nice. It gets progressively worse, and then he basically, in that interview, admits that they're using controlled starvation as a negotiating tactic, and just basically everything you would expect from a Iran hawk and an evangelical Christian Zionist to the max, and who's entirely driven by ideology. And apparently, he's influencing the president. 3 hours ago, Donald Trump posted this unhinged, sycophantic text message from Huckabee to Truth Social. I'm just going to bring it up and then we'll just get into the conversation. Okay, 1 second. He's just like fever posting right now. So we see like 20 minutes ago,
the evacuation advice was hilarious. It's like, do you think Trump knows that Tehran is like 20 million people living in it? Like, where the fuck do you evacuate to?
Yeah. And then he texts unconditional surrender. We know where the supreme leader is. And, I don't really want to read this whole thing by Mike Huckabee, but Mr. President, it's just because, Donald Trump reposted this. Mr. President, God spared you in Butler, Pennsylvania, to be the most consequential president in a century, maybe ever. The decisions on your shoulders I would not want to be made by anyone else. You have many voices speaking to you, sir, but there is only one voice that matters, his voice. I am your appointed servant in this land and am available for you, but I do not try to get in your presence often because I trust your instincts. No president in my lifetime has been in a position like yours, not since Truman in 1945. Okay, whatever. I will not abandon this post. Our flag will not come down. You did not seek this moment. This moment sought you. It is my honor to serve you. Mike Huckabee. And yeah. So, Trump also posted last night, quote, America first means many great things, including the fact that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon to make America great again. And also, somebody please explain to kooky Tucker Carlson that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. So, Ahmad, before we get into the Iran nitty gritty, how's MAGA world doing right now?
Well, there's a very interesting debate taking place. Obviously, they're kind of crashing out those who are at least opposed to the war because they are unhappy about the fact that Trump is basically George Bush. And so, yeah, you mentioned his Truth Social post. Trump also said, I decide what America first means. And there are a lot of people actually who agree with that, operationally at least. Sagar from Breaking Points was talking about it earlier today. He said that, people have been struggling to define what America first means. And so there's this debate over, like, are we an isolationist movement? Can we engage in providing people foreign aid or not? Greg, you and I were in D.C. this past weekend. Max Blumenthal interviewed people who were attending the Trump parade. And one of them that he interviewed at the tail end where the protests were was an 18-year-old kid who had just enlisted. And Max asked him, what does America first mean to you? And he just goes, means America first, baby. He's like, yeah, but what does that mean? He's like, it means America first. So there is no clear definition. It just exists as some weird imaginary thing that Trump represents, whatever he decides it is, for people like him. But there are a significant portion of MAGA people that do know what it means, and to them it means no more wars in the Middle East. And so I sent you a text of a link to these conservative podcasters. The Hodge twins are these African-American conservatives. They voted for Trump. They're big MAGA, but they've been criticizing him heavily for the last few days. So has Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, many other people on the right. And so there's a very important debate taking place, and it's going to produce just more fallout. A lot of people are just seeing Trump expose himself, as he has done for the last few months. But it's going to get worse.
Yeah. And it's not just Tucker Carlson. It's also Steve Bannon too. I'm going to play a quick clip from a podcast yesterday that basically prompted Trump going onto Truth Social to call Tucker Carlson kooky.
Convince me that the Iranian people are my enemy. Again, we're going down this here. Here's who you're required to hate. It's Orwell, man. I'm a free man. You're not telling me who I have to hate. I'll decide who I like and don't like on the basis of my values and what I believe my interests are. I don't want to be involved in this at all. And I think most Americans don't. And it's only because
we're inexorably getting drawn into a war.
By a tiny minority of people. You know what I mean? I'm just like, it's all so fake. I'm not playing along. I just don't want my country to be further weakened or destroyed by another one of these wars. And boy, if you can't connect the dots after 25 years of this, you're either too dumb to participate in the conversation, or you're, like Mark Levin, just a liar who doesn't care.
Okay. Yeah. So this is that's the interesting conversation going on. And of course, this war is extremely unpopular across all demographics. The U.S. is going to, just like we always do, manufacture consent, likely by playing into the domestic issues in Iran, particularly the role of women. Women in Iran are having bombs fall on their heads, but propagandists want to call that liberation, bomb them into freedom. America first, baby, which means America first. And, we use this same kind of femme-washing propaganda to justify our 2-decade violent occupation of Afghanistan. However, the goal really isn't to implement a regime change to save women. For some hawks, it's to turn Iran into a balkanized Libya and Syria. And, so Travis, you were in Iraq during the waning days of that war. Does any of this seem familiar?
Yeah, I wasn't in the waning part per se. I was in the surge.
Oh, yeah, the 2000.
A little bit of a ramp up, and then I was in the first stage, probably the first stage of when we started to hand off to the Iraqi army, or that was the intent anyway. So yeah, but I don't think any of these guys had quite learned the lesson of getting involved in stupid foreign wars or starting them, in that case, or getting drug into it or led by the nose by Israel, or whoever you want to lay that blame on. But yeah, I don't think they'd quite learned that lesson yet. That we were in the middle of learning it.
I mean, have we learned the lesson though?
Probably not. We're not generally very good at learning that lesson. History will show us. But it's ironic to sit there and or not ironic. It's surreal to sit there and agree with Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon. I do think there's an undercurrent. I do think there's an undercurrent of a certain group that I'm pretty sure they don't like. Underneath that, I think we're seeing that crop up in MAGA, but I don't want to send this podcast down that road. I think that's
yeah. Well,
but the right wing in the U.S. has always had that undercurrent, and I think we're seeing it shoot back up now. But yeah.
Yeah, so Ahmad, last night when we were talking about this episode, you were just recently in Iran. and you definitely wanted to address, you know, the propaganda surrounding like the strikes, where they're hitting. They've been making some bold claims, like the entirety of Iranian airspace is now under the control of the Israeli Air Force, stuff like that. So wherever you want to start.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert, but obviously, I know enough, and basically, yeah, they've been making these claims saying that they control, all of Iran's airspace. Today, that's what they said, but in the beginning, they were saying that they controlled all the airspace from Tehran all the way to the west. So basically, a nice chunk of Irani territory, and they were claiming that F-35s were flying all over. Iran claimed that they shot down 3. We haven't seen any evidence of it. I imagine if they had shot down an F-35, they'd be showing it everywhere, but they aren't doing that. So I don't really believe Iran when they say they shot down an F-35, nor do I believe Israel when they say that they're just flying all over their airspace. There are some pretty good Irani accounts that I follow that are posting about how Iran's air defenses are active. They're shooting down a ton of drones, and we're finding out more and more about the Mossad operation. They basically set up these shell corporations to rent homes from people over the last 6 to 8 months, and they've been using those homes to smuggle components inside of so that they could put they could assemble together drones that can carry guided missiles, and that's what they've been using to carry out these assassinations. And they say that a lot of the strikes, the drones are taking off like 3 to 5 kilometers away from the target. And so they've been capturing a lot of Iranis, Indians, Indian nationals that are in Iran that were working for the Mossad, and they're finding, entire warehouses, homes, trucks that either have fully built drones or components for drones, and they've just been going around the country taking out targets that the Israelis instruct them to take out. And so I don't think they actually control the airspace, but they definitely have a problem inside the country for sure.
Right. And that's kind of my question for you, Travis. I think you may know a little bit more about this than I do. When it comes to like controlling the airspace, the F-35, which is their main like line aircraft now, in order to just like drop a payload off in Iran, they're having to refuel using U.S. strata tankers over Syrian airspace. So like, how would they actually control the airspace?
Yeah, I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's realistic. I think, like Ahmad pointed out, both sides, both sides are doing some bluster and some hyperbole for sure. We saw those tankers move over the last couple of days, saw them relocating towards the zone. So that's 100% happening. But yeah, each one of those planes only has a certain loiter capacity. And additionally, you're talking about Iran. You're not talking about a country that doesn't have the capacity to shoot down those fighters. I agree. Until you show evidence, I don't believe you shot them down. But they absolutely have systems that are capable of doing that. There's a couple of those air defense systems that when they turn them on, they'll lock down entire theaters, and even the U.S. Air Force won't fly in that zone when that thing's operating. So that capacity is there to shoot down those aircraft. So I highly doubt they're just sitting there circling. That doesn't sound very likely to me. What's much more likely is they're carrying out sorties of pre-planned target strikes. And depending on what kind of observation capability they have, they may be changing or being routed to hit targets of opportunity. Maybe a missile system gets identified, or that Iran rolls something out to fire back, and then because a lot of times what they'll do is they'll expose something to shoot, and then they'll pull it back under some kind of cover. But other than that, what they're most likely executing is pre-planned targets. That's what I would expect in this kind of operation.
Travis, can I ask you a question? Is it possible that they're able to drop like guided bombs from outside Irani airspace? Like, how far can a guided bomb travel? Is it like 50 miles? Is it a few hundred miles? Like, what are they capable of?
I don't know their specific capability on some of the munitions that can travel that far. There are things that can do that. You're not going to drop most of the ordnance that the F-35 is going to be carrying is not going to be dropped from very far away. You're going to be within the region. You're going to be within shoot down range. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I mean that's the big difference between a bomb. It doesn't have any sort of propulsion.
Yeah,
so once it leaves the aircraft, it begins to fall.
Yeah, that's true. And then again, there are some ordnance that are capable of being airdropped and then moving quite a decent ways. But I don't believe the F-35 is outfitted with any of those. That said, we did talk about early on that the Israelis were using submarines in their strikes. Those are completely capable of firing land attack cruise missiles, which, just for the audience, your ballistic missile has a high trajectory, right? You think about like a Scud or something like that, relatively high arc of fire, and then comes in vertically. A cruise missile or an LACM is relatively flat firing, tends to hug the terrain features of the earth, and kind of moves like a plane essentially to the target. I mean, you can shoot cruise missiles from submarines. I'm sure the Israelis have that. So you do have some capabilities beyond just the big overarching fires.
Yeah. But yeah, it does make sense. It's mostly a drone effort. And I just want to kind of like focus on,
I don't think it's mostly a drone effort. I mean, on the Iranian side, you've got, they've fired like 370 ballistic missiles so far. I think approximately was the estimate I saw. They're estimated to have somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 that are capable of hitting Israel. So that'd be any of their ballistic missiles that are above the 1,000 kilometer range, I believe, can hit Israel. And they also have a fairly high production. The numbers the Israelis were putting out, which is kind of a funny source for Iranian production, but they were saying that like Iran was approaching, 300 a month, which I'm sure is an exaggeration to get everybody freaked out. But, if even half of that is true, that's a lot. And expending 370 so far isn't that much if you've got 3,000 and are capable of producing more each month, on top of what is running out absolutely on the US and Israel side are interceptors.
Right. And that's kind of like the game of brinksmanship that we're seeing. It's like between Iran, like they're leveraging their stockpile of ballistic missiles against the interceptor stockpiles of the US and Israel, but also these guided bomb units that Israel relies on the U.S. to fill their magazines for. So it's basically like a munitions standoff in this distance conflict.
Absolutely. And we were having, I think we were talking the other day, we were trying to figure out, okay, what you've got U.S. Navy cruisers interdicting Iranian fires and Iranian missile and drone fires coming in. Why does it seem like so much is getting through to Israel this time versus last year? Well, one of the reasons is the U.S. expended, I think this came from Caldwell, Hegseth's old advisor. The U.S. expended a year's worth of interceptor missile production just against the Houthis last year.
Yeah.
So it burned an entire year's worth of production. And apparently the U.S. capacity is only 100 to 150 of those a year manufacturing. It's not very high at the rate that they're being expended in these strikes. And so, Israel undoubtedly has a stockpile as well, but also has a very limited capacity to reproduce these rapidly. And so what we're probably looking at is rationing. They're picking what things they're going to shoot down. They're probably picking the biggest stuff and letting other things go through. That's probably why we're seeing the level of strikes we're seeing.
Yeah. I mean, it's not because they're necessarily like flooding the airspace that much. It's like they're just having to determine which target, like the fire control system is having to make determined. Yeah.
It's probably a mix of both. Also, Iran is watching what's getting through. Like any of their artillery system units, just like we would be watching what's getting through, what's getting shot down, where's it getting shot down, stuff like that. So I'm sure they're adjusting their targeting based on the coverage as well.
Yeah. And so Ahmad, have you been you've been monitoring where the strikes are kind of like hitting in Israel? And I think there's like definitely a gag order. We've seen a lot of accounts on social media say do not post pictures of any battle damage within Israel itself. So
yeah, it's funny, you get Israel reporting that everything's fine, nothing's hitting Iron Dome, stopping everything, and then you get a video from a Lebanese wedding that clearly shows that's not true, right? With a saxophone in the background for
what significant targets have been hit so far?
I mean, they've definitely taken hits to air bases. I think that's pretty clear. Some of the strikes that are getting called, they're attacking civilian targets in Tel Aviv. It's like, no, the Israeli Pentagon is underneath Tel Aviv. There's a reason that the shots are being fired where they're being fired. So
the fortress of Zion, I suppose. But you've been monitoring both like Israeli and Iranian media. What do you think the effect of these strikes from Iran on the Israeli population has been? Ahmad.
Well, the population themselves, we've seen videos of people crying in shock. So definitely it has an effect. But I saw a quote yesterday. Somebody in Israeli media was basically saying that they were preparing for this wave to produce at least 5,000 deaths or 5,000 casualties. And that hasn't happened, not even close. It's like maybe 200 or 300.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were basically saying like, oh, we thought it would be a lot worse. This actually isn't that bad. And our shelters, which is funny because they keep saying that Iran is targeting civilians, but then they say that, not that many civilians have died. But I'm actually concerned, based on what Travis is saying about Iran potentially having like 2,000 to 3,000 missiles, because if they have to potentially defend themselves against the United States and Israel, and all they really have going for them are these missiles. And, it's only been a couple of days and they've already burned through if it's true, only 2,000 to 3,000, they've burned through a significant percentage of them. And I've been hearing for a very long time that, Ukraine is running out of artillery. Ukraine is running out of air defenses. Israel's going to run out of munitions soon. And the Ukraine front, the war has been raging on for 2 years, 3 years now. And Israel has just been going endlessly. So, like, I want to believe that their inventory is limited and that Iran has an advantage. At the same time, though, they've just been at war endlessly. So I don't know if it's propaganda. I don't know, if there's any truth to it. Obviously, I understand it costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time to produce these interceptors. I don't know if this is true. I came across a piece of information and said that it takes the United States can only produce like 30 or 50 interceptors for the THAAD every year. So if that's the case, they probably burnt through God knows how many, right, in just the last few days. But even if they had no more air defenses and Iran were to unleash 2,000 or 3,000 missiles, that's not going to do to Israel what Israel has done to Gaza. And I feel like if Israel isn't afraid of that possibility, then they're never going to be deterred. And so I don't know what to make of it, but I'm not very optimistic about what's going on right now.
Right. No, and there's definitely a bunch of different opinions. I was just interviewing Batul Subaidi last night on Mint Press, and she is more optimistic than I am. But I guess it's based off this general overriding idea that the Iranians have a higher capacity to sustain casualties and austerity measures and economics than the Israelis can. And of course, we saw that Iran hit the power station in Haifa. Like once civil infrastructure starts to degrade within Israel itself, the hope being that people will actually just start to leave like they've been leaving, but and that will have disastrous economic consequences for Israel itself. Like, I think like any sort of collapse will have to be from the economic side,
which you can potentially get. I mean, I'm definitely not arguing about the risk of carrying out that level of strike, or the ability to stop, the ability for the U.S. to not keep up with that. A couple notes on the production, because Ahmad, I totally agree with you. The limited capacity to produce those THAAD interceptors is a huge piece of the math. Part of the reason for that low production rate, you're like, well, shouldn't the U.S. be able to manufacture way more than that? And the answer is yes. However, they were only typically manufactured at a replacement rate, so they would only make enough a year to replace the ones that they were either A, selling, or B, this one's old, we're going to expend it in a training exercise and replace it, because they have the stockpile, and the stockpile's the war estimate on hand. But yeah, so that's why, and those programs are not easy to ramp up production. It's not easy to go from 50 to try to say, okay, we're going to try to double or triple that production. Those facilities are all very, very high tech and take time to build. I do think, though, however, like if you want to talk about economic impacts, if Iran is able to continually hit with fairly high accuracy military targets and things like power stations, airports, I don't want to put words in their mouth as far as like what they're targeting, but you absolutely are going to have an economic impact on a country. People are constantly being forced to go underground. And then just militarily, because it's very hard to operate an Air Force heavy military like the IDF. It's very hard to operate that if your airfields are taking ballistic missile strikes. It's very difficult because they only have so much limited bunker cover, etc. It's very hard to keep an entire air fleet underground all the time, except for when they're flying sorties. So I do think that impact is potential. Additionally, no one has a good number on this, but the 2,000 to 3,000 number is for ballistic missiles only. Iran definitely started producing their own cruise missiles in like 2018. So how many they have, no one seems to know. I couldn't find any kind of good number on that. And then the UAVs, they're loitering, both propeller driven and jet engine driven kamikaze drones, so to speak, also supposedly number in the thousands, like the Shahid drones, etc. So
Yeah, and one thing we have to take into consideration too is, yes, okay, it does seem like, you know, the U.S. stockpiles within the context of like Ukraine have been like limitless, but let's just look at the unified.
I mean, that part wasn't true. They absolutely hit 155 shell shortages specifically. I know. I used to be in Paladin artillery 155 units, and the Ukrainians were absolutely being limited on the size of the barrages they're able to fire, the number of rounds they're able to fire back with, the things they're able to shoot back at. They were absolutely being limited by US 155 production. But again, none of that takes away what you were talking about with what are the repercussions of shooting that much ordnance, right? You know, is the US going to enter the war, et cetera? So yeah,
here's the issue.
Not countering any of that.
No, here's the issue. Like, let's look at the map of the Unified Combatant Commands. You know, this is something everybody should know because it's politically important if you're in the world of geopolitics. So you got NORTHCOM, U.S. NORTHCOM, which is North America, U.S. SOUTHCOM, South America, U.S. AFRICOM, and of course U.S. CENTCOM. So U.S. CENTCOM goes from Egypt all the way to China, through Pakistan to the China and Indian border, stops at Russia, and then further east, you have U.S. Indo-PACCOM. And of course, like with all these combatant commands, there are certain like resources that they're going to like willing to allocate, which fleet deployments to go through. Like how much resources do we have to basically allocate to CENTCOM when there's a mounting concern that China might make a move on Taiwan?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and I think THAAD interceptors was a great example because who else needs that? Ukraine needs that. Our allies, I'm sure, are bulking up on the interceptors that are U.S. manufactured that they have, and they're trying to buy more right now as well for their systems. You know, especially those Eastern European NATO countries, etc. So yeah, this is by far not the only demand on those production systems.
Right. And, you know, last episode we did last night, we spent a lot of time talking about like the overriding economic system of capitalism and stuff. But like it's important to like ground this in kind of like the boring, mundane, like logistical reality of like what it would take because to actually like effectuate like regime change around, because there are hawks like along the belt. There are beltway hawks, and you know, within the think tank community, especially with like the Atlantic Council, is just like bomb them a few times, the people will rise up, replace the regime. But like, first of all, we don't have enough bombs. Second of all, that's not how it works. And
also, please show me where historically has that worked.
I'm trying to think.
I'm trying to think too. That
where
has that worked?
I would say
didn't work on the Houthis, didn't work on Iraq, didn't work in Vietnam.
It worked in Syria.
Okay.
It worked in Syria, and that's unfortunately what's guiding and making them feel confident about this plan. And it's two things. It's Hezbollah and Syria that are giving them confidence, because Israel basically is combining both strategies. First of all, with Hezbollah, you know, remember Hezbollah said we're not agreeing to a ceasefire until there's a ceasefire in Gaza, until the genocide ends. So Israel bombed them heavily. They wouldn't agree. Then Israel decided to decapitate their entire command structure when they realized Iran wasn't going to step in. So finally, they killed all the men until they got to the man that was willing to negotiate with them. And they negotiated a ceasefire, and Hezbollah did everything they said they wouldn't do. They agreed to a ceasefire before Gaza got one. They retreated behind the Litany River, and Israel still occupies portions of the south, and they bomb and kill whoever they want, whenever they want in Lebanon. And Hezbollah is basically a wounded bee that has one sting left, and it's just waiting for, you know, this final showdown with Iran potentially, and then they're done. Not to people who support Hezbollah listening might be upset to hear that, but that's just the reality. And then you look at Syria, they sanctioned them for a decade. They bombed them for a decade. they armed proxies, and they baked the cake, and HTS blew out the candle. They didn't have to do much. They launched an offensive, and in 12 days, Bashar al-Assad collapsed. So they have two examples in the last year, and that motivates them. And this is what Netanyahu's selling to the White House administration. Obviously, they have control over them regardless. They don't have to do much convincing, but that's what their argument is, that we can do this. Iran has been under sanctions for a long time. They're like a hollowed out tree. All we got to do is tip it over and it'll fall. So that's why they think that they can just tighten the noose, sanction the crap out of them, kill people, starve them. They're setting fires to their oil and gas at a time when their economy is already in really. I mean, when I went there, honestly, people had everything they need, but people still felt the weight of the sanctions, and their GDP has been slashed by 50% in the last 9 years because of the sanctions. And now they want them to go to war. So at their most vulnerable state, and they've obviously been killing, like you just mentioned at the start of this podcast, Greg, they killed the commander that just replaced the commander that was killed 4 days ago. And they're not killing these people because if they feel that if they kill the Ayatollah, he's the glue that holds everything together, they kill him and everyone who could potentially replace him. Eventually, they'll get to the person that agrees to sell out the entire country, or they can have a coup or something. So I'm not saying that will happen, but that is what they're trying.
No,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. That makes
And
a lot of sense.
I wrote a short essay about like what I interpret personally the U.S. game plan to be, and it's basically going to spend 2 minutes going through it. After watching the distance conflict erupt across West Asia over the past few days, it's clear that the U.S. and Israel did not launch this war against Iran to try to eliminate the nuclear sites. Obviously, they're too hardened and dispersed. Any damage can be rebuilt over time because they can't destroy the knowledge, despite how many scientists and professors they kill over the weekend, including their families. They launched it to cause a phased, complete collapse in Iran. Phase 1, eliminate top military IRGC leaders and scientists associated with the nuclear program. Despite massacring civilians and building collapses, they want to be able to propagate the narrative that they are being restrained and only targeting dangerous, high-value targets. They expected a restrained, strategic patience response from Iran in the vein of the two previous Operation True Promises. And regardless of how effective the strikes were, we saw massive Iron Dome failures in Tel Aviv and Haifa, they saw that Iran wasn't willing to meet them at the same level of escalation, though this will perhaps change in the coming week. Phase 2, they will begin to target political leaders, starting with Ayatollah Khamenei. Their hope is not regime change or to reinstate a fascist Zionist monarchy of the glitterati that harkens back to the 1970s. Rather, we know the Iranian people as their
Travis, is it just me or did Greg?
Yeah, I think Greg froze for a second.
Okay, well, you and I will have to
Carry it.
We got to.
Yeah, I'm really interested because listening to what you just said, I was thinking about this and I was like, well, what is the likelihood that the reverse is also possible, that Israel triggering these strikes and Iran striking back is causing the Israeli population to, for the first time in a long time, especially on that scale, deal with that level of the impact of their government's behavior. And I'm curious, could this potentially end up in the removal of Netanyahu instead?
There's two things, yes and no. I think, in my opinion, yes, this could have led to his removal if they had done this while Hezbollah was doing it. That's one. Two, sorry, it's slipping my mind right now. The reason why I say no, the majority of the population is genocidal. I mean, they've polled them.
Yeah.
They support what they're doing in Gaza. They think they should do more.
Yeah.
And they support a war with Iran. So will that change when they're like inconvenienced? Yeah. I don't think, they can stomach what other populations can stomach just because of the lifestyle, the standard of lifestyle they have. But can Iran do this for more than a week or two?
And so many people. Sorry, not to interrupt that, but also so many Israelis having a second passport, right? So many of them have the opportunity to go back to somewhere in Europe or
right
US or something like that. It's like, are you gonna stay under ballistic missile barrage? I'm curious. How much?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, they shut down the
Iranians can't go anywhere, right? So.
Well, apparently Israelis can't either. They announced that they're not letting anyone use the airport to leave. The new hostages is like basically all of Israeli society.
I don't know if this is true. I heard
Yeah.
that some were going through. I heard some were going through Jordan. That they were traveling through Jordan and flying out of Jordan to get out of
Yeah,
the
and
region
potentially
of that
Egypt
trip.
as well. Yeah. The population's gotta, when they enter Jordan or Egypt, they gotta harass them.
You would hope.
They got-
Greg, we were just talking about the possibility that this exchange of ballistic missiles, this exchange of fire, we were talking about you were talking about Israel and the U.S. playbook to get the Iranian regime to collapse. How is the reverse possible as well? That Tel Aviv apartment buildings getting hit causes the Netanyahu government to be to lose. But yeah.
Yeah. So how awkward was the transition between like me losing internet because Maggie's internet sucks, and continuing the conversation? Do I need to go back and edit it?
Like a 3. That wasn't bad.
No, we did a pretty good job. We immediately understood what we needed to. It was like you were the Ayatollah and you were gone, and we just stepped up and we were like,
Okay.
all right, we're next.
All right. Well, you know what? I'm gonna keep going. All right, because this is the form. All right. We need another Libya and another Syria, a massive consent manufacturing media propaganda campaign in conjunction with the arming, funding, and deployment of proxy militias and terrorist networks in tandem with the Gulf, quote, Arab shield puppet regimes and NATO. So the third phase is a multilateral civil war that will end with the balkanization of the country. So the Mujahideen al-Khalq, the organization, aka the MEK, the MEK, which has a long history of U.S. intelligence cooperation and other similar proxy forces, have been trained in Turkey, Azerbaijan, and certain parts of Europe, will be mobilized. We can reasonably expect a rash of car bombings and bazaars and sporting events to shake people's confidence in the enforcement capabilities of the government. I would be 0% surprised if ISIS-K, the Islamic State in Khorasan, reappeared right on schedule. While Trump clearly ran political cover during the nuclear deal negotiations for Israel, unless he was betrayed, again, ask a dozen insiders, you'll get a dozen opinions. Indeed, the whole falling out drama between himself and Netanyahu seems entirely ginned up, just like under Biden. It's important to apprehend this is not a Trump decision. It would have happened under Harris. This is the unrelenting and unchanging violent logic of the U.S. empire, which now knows only force. No matter the president, the military, industrial, media, political intelligence, and academic complex is absolutely on board. So Iran and its axis of resistance to the monolithic U.S.-Israeli NATO hegemony in West Asia, is the first piece on the board that needs to fall, never to rise again. Iran's increasing security and civic alliance with Russia and China must be smashed, because Russia and China, too, must also be isolated and choked in order for the U.S. to maintain its unipolar imperium. Already, hawkish Atlantic Council think tanks are writing position papers on how this might happen. From yesterday, quote, the Atlantic Council. Friday's Israeli strike on Iran occurred under relatively favorable conditions, already degraded air defenses, neutralized proxies, and no existing nuclear deterrent, complicating direct comparisons to potential preemptive strikes on true U.S. peers such as Russia or China, unquote. And make no mistake, this is an existential war of survival for Iran, not just as a state, i.e. the political entity, but as a nation, the group of people who share a common culture, history, and identity. The CIA, Mossad, and Gulf intelligence services will stoke ethnic and religious tensions, arm sectarian militias as they devolve into overt death squads in service of territorial warlords. It is the neocon Zionist fever dream to manifest this apocalyptic vision on millions of Iranians. And then the people of the Sahel countries in Africa, whose governments are expelling U.S. and French troops, and then, despite nuclear deterrence, Russia and China, anyone who resists. So one final note, based on the pace and target profiles of Iran's retaliatory strikes, it does not seem like they are committed to a war to victory. Israel has no strategic depth, and if Iran wanted to establish deterrence, they would target critical infrastructure such as desalination plants, electricity and communication hubs, critical agricultural supply, ports, and airports. But they don't. Do they still want a route to the negotiating table? Is Iran as a government and military deceptively weak? Either way, U.S.-led diplomacy is never again going to be trusted. As a deal neared, the empire struck. Diplomacy as deception. So I don't know, what was the conversation in Iran about all of this?
Sorry, Greg. I'm just looking at a Pentagon source told Al Jazeera B-52 bombers are now on the Indian Ocean island of Diego Garcia.
I wouldn't be surprised.
So, but yeah. I didn't want to interrupt it. Just I felt like that was a new piece of information that we should take into consideration.
Well, yeah, I mean, it could be just a negotiating tip. Like those B-52s are complete like target devastation weapons, aren't they, Travis?
They can drop a hell of a lot of stuff. I mean, they've been in service a long time, so yeah, they can do carpet bombing. They can drop all kinds of ordnance.
Yeah.
But going back to your point, I guess Iran has always known that they were
on the chopping block.
I do want to point out B-52s are not stealth and have a huge radar cross section, i.e., are very shoot downable. So, if an F-35 was in fact hit, I would not be flying B-52s over the same place. But that's just me.
You need complete air superiority to
you do. You really
over target. Okay, so anyways, sorry, Ahmed, what were you commenting on about Iran always knowing that they were the target?
Yeah, they've always known they're on the chopping block.
Oh, sorry.
Jesus.
Sorry. I'm not. No, but it's because you brought this up earlier. That's the platform that can do it. The B-52 is the one that can drop cruise missiles and stuff that can fly in and strike from where the B-52 is dropping the munition.
Is that because it's flying so high up, or?
Yeah, well, it's big enough to carry that kind of stuff.
I see.
It's got a big enough payload. Sorry, I hate to interrupt, but you brought this up, and I'm like, yeah,
no,
you're right.
Okay, it's important because the whole one of Trump's like items on his war plan, apparently. Look, I've done several videos on Iran and the Trump war plan for them, but it's mainly sourced from Ken Klippenstein, the journalist who wrote a 3-piece article like 2 or 3 months ago now. And he had private contractors at the Pentagon that leaked information to him. Of course, they had non-disclosure agreements. They weren't supposed to talk about it, but he got information from them. And some of the information is public as well. But he detailed the entire war plan. The only thing that's incorrect about it is that it didn't mention Israel as executing the plan. It was thought that the U.S. would execute it. It looks like the U.S. might come in and finish it. But for the most part, the war plan in detail that Ken Klippenstein wrote his articles about is happening right in front of our eyes. It's just Israel who's executing it. But they're doing so with the United States' help. And one of the last pieces that we've yet to see is a tactical nuclear weapon. And the whole idea was that this B-52 was going to fly over Fordo and drop this tactical nuclear weapon. And it was going to, there's some new weapon. I forget the name of it. I'm sure you know it, Travis. But it's like a bunker buster. It'll go down like 10 or 15 meters and then it'll detonate.
Yeah, it's MOPS, a massive ordnance penetrator.
Yeah, but there's a name for the tactical nuclear weapon. It's a low yield.
Oh, okay.
I'm forgetting it. They just updated it. I'll have to come up with the name for it. But yeah, it's something that in the last like 10 years, Trump had from his first administration, Trump gave the order to like update it. And so they've had this low yield nuclear weapon that is, I guess, connected to a Moab or whatever the case is, but it's supposed to detonate underground. And their line of thinking is that this will collapse the infrastructure on top of Fordo, or at least destroy the shafts or the ventilation systems or something. So that's the last thing that we haven't seen yet. And if the B-52s really are there and Trump is really talking about doing this, then there's a potential that we actually see it in use.
Yeah, but they've already had B1. They've already had the B1 bomb, or sorry, B2 bombers.
Yeah, they could already do that.
I could already do that.
And also I mean, it's not the points are not invalid, but yeah, to your point, the B1s can do that, and they can do that taking off from North Dakota, right?
Yeah.
They take off from North Dakota. They have 2 crews on them. You know, they fly for a super long amount of time, go over, drop, and they drop at super high altitude too. They're very hard to shoot down. The B-52, I believe, used to be able to carry the B-61, which is the gravity, straight drop down, low yield nuclear capable bomb. I think that's probably the one that was being mentioned.
Yes,
I think that was replaced with which one was it? It was replaced with the 86B, which is an air launched cruise missile. One of the things that you brought up, that is nuclear capable, so you can put a nuclear warhead on it. But yeah, those are the 2 munitions I think you were talking about.
Yeah. So what I was trying to get was like, having been to Iran, like what was your sense, or the general sense of, they knew they were on the target, the chopping block. They know that, I don't know, the U.S. wants the Iran.
It kind of reminded me of Ukraine. If you remember, like in the lead up to the Ukraine war, when they would interview Ukrainians, they would say, they talk about this all the time. They've been talking about war with Russia like for years. It's not going to happen. And I don't know if it's like a coping mechanism, like you just don't even want to think about it, so you don't even consider it as a possibility, or if they really were just thinking that this, we've been here before. But that was the sense that I got when I was there. I was thinking, you guys are next. It's coming. Like it's obvious. Like I thought it would happen while I was there. And the people I was speaking to was like, this isn't going to happen. And that was, I mean, that was kind of concerning for me that they could kind of, I don't want to say be oblivious because they know the true nature of the United States, but it was just concerning that they wouldn't even consider it as a possibility. And I think that's dangerous. But, it's not like I spoke to anyone directly in the military. I'm sure maybe they were preparing, in any way that they could. But it just goes back to this question of like, should Iran have actually made a nuclear weapon? Because the whole argument they're making now is, oh, they might get a nuclear weapon, therefore we have to stop them. But if they actually had a nuclear weapon, this wouldn't even be taking place. So
yeah, I think this in conjunction with Libya, I think that is kind of put the nail in the coffin for any sort of proliferation actions going forward. Like if you talk to people who've been on like the negotiating team with North Korea and the DPRK, one of the most common responses was like, yeah, you want us to denuclearize? Well, how did that work out for Libya? And now it's going to be like, how did negotiating not having a nuclear program work out for Iran? Like when it comes to like nuclear global security, this is only going to make everything less safe.
Yeah, unfortunately so. I mean, the Libyan leader was sodomized on camera to death, and Libya was destroyed, and it's still destroyed. So
it's still a failed state.
Yeah, I mean, Iraq, they were forced to. They didn't have nuclear weapons, but they did have powerful missile systems, and they were dismantled, and they were forced to do that. And all throughout the process, they were still under sanctions, and 1 million children are reported to have starved to death. And then to top it all off, they were invaded and destroyed further. So yeah, if you have weapons of any type of destruction that can deter your enemy, you have to not only keep them, but you need to advance them because.
Well, if your enemy is the United States, that's definitely true. So
yeah.
Well, going forward, I guess like that's just going to be a part of modern diplomacy from now on.
I mean, if you're anybody else watching this, like if you're China and Russia, like I don't know how do you I don't know how you not get involved. Like you can't, you've got to be looking at Iran, not just regionally, like who's next, but like globally, like yeah, you're next, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people are saying Iran kind of stands in the way, and what's next is China, but a lot of people have been critical of China, and I've seen this all over X. They're like, why aren't they doing more? They're kind of like they just want to do business with anyone, and they need to be more loyal to their BRICS members, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, they are supporting Iran by buying a ton of their oil and doing these different things, but I agree that they need to do more, not just because it'll be them next, but if you look at Syria, one of the ways that Ahmed al-Shara or Jolani, whatever you want to call the new leader, I'm going to use both names so that I don't get attacked from both directions by people on this issue. But one of the ways that, he was able to get sanctions lifted, there are a lot of ways he got sanctions lifted. We won't go into
Yeah, we don't need to go into Syria.
But apparently, one of the things they told Trump is, we'll do business with you and not with China.
Mm-hmm.
And China's been kind of like pushed out of Syria now. And so is that a big deal to China? They're probably not panicking over it because Syria didn't have a lot going for it economically at the time anyway.
Yeah, but Iran's completely different.
Iran is completely different. Iran provides them with a lot of oil and gas. And yeah, they could get that from Russia, but it's nice to have more than one option. And so they have to imagine if Iran falls and flips, then they'll be cut out of Iran as well. So it's not just military concerns and security concerns, it's economic as well. So China should definitely be trying to do whatever they can to support Iran, even if that means giving whatever they can to Pakistan and letting Pakistan give it to Iran.
Yeah. And of course, I think people have been disappointed by like the lack of like solidarity between BRICS nations, but it's an economic alliance. It's not like this massive like.
Yeah, it's not like NATO.
It's not like NATO, and plus BRICS is full of is rife with its own contradictions too. So, yeah. If it ever does manage to de-dollarize, it's not going to affect current events.
And that's
at
the
all.
problem.
It needs to be renamed too. The first country is like doing nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where I'm sorry, I love Brazilians, but where is Brazil in this conversation? Like, it isn't.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's the problem, right? Is that it's touted as like this system, this alternative system that will usher in this new world order and produce a multipolar world. But it's not enough. And economically, it's not even, doing the things that it needs to do. I mean, Brazil voted to keep Venezuela out, but bring Argentina in, and Turkey's in, but Turkey's also helping undermine like half the alliance. India and China are constantly at each other's throats. I mean, these people hate each other, and you see it all over X. Like, they have a massive mountain range between them, and yet they still want to find a way to destroy each other. And they're supposed to be economic partners that make up the core of BRICS.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, last time I checked, I don't remember Bolsonaro being a huge Trump enemy. That just doesn't. I don't remember that.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So BRICS, a lot of people like to get excited about it, but there's just too many flaws and contradictions and issues. So yeah, that needs to change if they actually want to produce this world that they're talking about, this multipolar world.
Yeah, and we're basically trying to destroy Iran for no good reason, and they're an initiated member now. So there's that. So here we go. It's clear that we're still the empire, and we've got a lot of inertia behind it still.
Yeah, there was somebody I followed who posted America is about to experience a new golden age. And I thought it was absurd. I was like, America's in decline. But then I don't know. You just see them continuing to truck along as the empire. And who's to say they're going to fail? Who's to say they won't end up undermining and defeating China? I mean, one by one, they're, picking people off. So I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but I mean, they're continuing to exist as an empire and execute. So who knows what the future holds?
Yeah, well, that's a cheery note to end on. I mean, I think what's really going to come down to is like how insufferable the material conditions in America are going to become over the next decade. Like, there's no fixing it. Like, do you see any actual progressive political movement that wants financial reform in this country?
No. I mean, Mamdani might get elected in New York City. That's the only person I see.
Yeah, okay, that's it.
He's literally the only fucking one.
Yeah, it's not Bernie. It's not AOC. They're controlled opposition anyway.
He'll be a flower in a landfill.
Yeah, he will.
Damn.
But it's funny. Like, I remember 10 years ago when I was a young activist, idealistic. I was like, we need universal basic income. Like, we need a UBI. And why can't we live in a system in which we have a UBI? And like, that would be good for people. And now we're about to get it. And I realize it's not good. We're getting it by force because they're just going to take away all our jobs. Or most people's jobs because of AI and automation. And now they have no other choice but to give you UBI, and you're going to be, there are going to be fewer and fewer opportunities.
They're going to tie it. They're going to tie it to drug testing and pregnancy testing and shit too, though.
Yeah. Are you
and your social payments in your Twitter account, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. You say anything against the government, you fail a weed test, we're starving your kids. Like, that's already in progress.
You're a woman who's 21 and unmarried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're on birth control? Sorry, you don't get universal basic income because we need more workers.
I don't think Americans are prepared for how gnarly this shit's gonna get.
I take that the other way too, though, but maybe just because I'm unhinged myself. But it's like, go ahead and do that. I don't think you understand how bad it'll get from the ground up either. But sure.
Yeah. So I think that's what's gonna end the empire. So I'm not an accelerationist. I guess, like, if you're a Marxist, you'd say, call it like heightening the contradictions. But Trump's definitely going to do that. The big beautiful bill passed the House, I think, just while we were recording. So,
oh, how lovely! The big beautiful bill, the BBB.
Mm-hmm. So, like, the domestic situation in America, and this is why I try to get people to care about foreign policy stuff. It's like, it's all connected. There's no daylight between the war state and the police state and what's happening overseas with Trump wanting to redevelop Gaza and also cut social health care programs.
Well, to that point, there's also almost no daylight between the Democrats and the Republicans in some of this shit in foreign policy, right? You know, this thing of like, oh, hey, you rest easy at home because you elected the blue party. And it's like, no, they're still fucking up everyone globally.
That's why I fucking hate liberals. Like I saw at the No Kings protest, not no oligarchs, not no billionaires, no kings. What were all those signs that were saying if Harris was president, we'd all be at brunch? I was like, yeah, motherfucker. That's why you guys keep fucking losing.
Yeah, you would be at brunch. Yeah,
you would be at brunch.
You'd be at brunch. You know, a shipment of bombs would still be going to Israel every 2 weeks. So it'd be business as usual.
Yeah. I don't know. We still got a lot of momentum going left. We got a lot of imperial inertia. So I guess this fucking train's going to keep on rolling. We'll see whether or not, the Iran thing will shape out. Does anyone have any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
I personally do not. It's just the situation's evolving quickly and it doesn't look good. I mean, we were talking earlier about Iran's air defenses and, I don't know. I'm seeing clips where Israel's bombing Tehran pretty heavily. And so it could be consistent with this idea that they control their airspace now. I don't know. But I just, I hope that the Irani people stay safe. I made a lot of friends while I was there. I had to message one of them because I hadn't heard from them in a couple days. Thought they were dead. They were journalists. And turns out they're like, no, we've been instructed to delete WhatsApp from our phone. And I'm going to delete Instagram next and all Meta applications. And so they're about to go dark, for a lot of us. It's going to be hard to communicate with them. And I just hope that, things work out because a lot of people's lives are at risk here.
Yeah. And finally, with just circling back to the conversation in MAGA, do you think this is like a forever fracture? Because you monitor these spaces far more than I do.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I know some. So first of all, a lot of these MAGA folks, over time, I think they don't even realize it, but they're discovering that they're not really entirely on the right, that their views are actually a lot more fluid and they agree with a lot of people on the left. And so there's this weird political transformation taking place where like the stereotypical left and right libs and like that's changing, at least for people engaged in the conversation. Majority of the population doesn't give a shit about any of these things. They're just gambling and masturbating and, drinking, and they don't care about this. But for those that are plugged in and engaged in this conversation and consuming this content, they are undergoing a transformation. And so I had someone who was like a diehard MAGA fan message me yesterday and say, I'm so done with Trump. I hate him. And they're obviously would never vote for Kamala Harris. And so what that means is that kind of voter is now anti two-party system and could potentially vote for someone like Mamdani in New York. Right. So there's really the potential. This is like a field of dry grass that's just waiting for a match to be lit. There are a lot of people in this country that are ready for a real political revolution and not the kind of bullshit that Bernie Sanders was talking about. I'm talking about a real political revolution where you have a new party built and the merging of personalities that you never could have imagined. And that will usher in potentially a new era. I'm not going to tell you that it's going to overthrow the establishment, the oligarchy. They're very wealthy and they've hijacked the system completely. But there's definitely a transformation taking place, and I think there will be a forever fracture. Tucker Carlson is now in Trump's bad graces for sure, and I don't think he's going to reverse his position. Candace Owens either, those kinds of people. And so there's this weird merging of like people on the left and the right that are meeting kind of in the middle on a lot of issues, not everything, but on a lot of important issues that Americans care about.
I think that makes sense. I mean, you talk about Sanders, right? Like I agree with you as far as the actual sincerity of the effort, but there's the number of Bernie bros who ended up voting for Trump is not insignificant, right? And those are some of those people. And Steve Bannon is a raving, foaming at the mouth lunatic, but he's also a populist. So there's crossover there, right? Like if you're listening to Bannon, you thought about voting for Sanders and you ended up being a MAGA guy and you now hate Trump. It's like, yeah, dude, it sounds like you were a populist, and because the Democrats completely abandoned working, their working class base, a lot of these populists ended up right populists instead of left populists, and you can bring them back. You can get those.
Yeah,
those people agree. There's a Venn diagram, and they have intersectionality, right?
yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of funny because it kind of validates Jackson Hinkle, because a lot of people mock Jackson Hinkle, the whole MAGA communism. A lot of people said that like they mocked him as if this was an absurd idea, and it's not. It's really not. So
yeah. I just wish, the whole MAGA communist movement by, co-opting patriotic symbols didn't also take up like incel fucking shit too, which some of
yeah, they're not perfect, but the underlying motivation for it is legitimate, I think.
It just needs a rebrand. You're just going to have to call it labor or workers or something that's not going to trigger their reflex, right?
Yeah.
You can't say socialist, you can't say communist because they freak out. But
yeah, don't use that language.
Call it a word that Americans like, and you're fine. And there you go. You're off to the races.
Yeah.
So
America only.
America only. I mean, that's really what they want to say.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay,
the American Union.
The American Union. Yes. Wait. I thought we were about states' right. Anyways, okay. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and try to get this published since it's moving super fast. But if you want to help the people of Iran not get bombed and stop wars, again, we're gonna be doing some shady shit in the Sahel countries. AFRICOM has already telegraphed that Burkina Faso is now the epicenter of global terrorism. So look, if you want all this to end, you just need to get stuck in with your own communities and here in the United States and demand something better, because the imperial war machine ain't stopping anytime soon. So thanks so much again, Travis and Ahmed from Prop & Co. We'll link your YouTube channel and your socials in the description. Thanks, guys, and I guess we'll be back. I'll be back. I don't know who's going to be available to keep covering this tomorrow, because this is literally ramping up to war. I'm going to be on this shit every day. So
yeah, absolutely. Same
all right.
Here. Thanks for having me, Travis. It was nice to meet you, man.
Yeah, nice meeting you too.
All right, and we are out. See you guys next time.